Judy said, we are recording this for any of our staff and volunteers who cannot attend today. We're very pleased to have you here today for this Lunch and Learn, which is all about strengthening the student connection. We give you this one quick slide about 10,000 degrees, as we do on all of our presentations, to make sure we keep in mind what we are all about and the framework for this presentation. 10,000 Degrees, as you probably know by now, is the leading equity-focused scholarship provider and college success nonprofit in California. Our mission is to achieve educational equity and to support students from low-income backgrounds to and through college to realize their full potential and positively impact their communities and the world. We keep this mission in mind in all of the work we do. Our organization uses strength-based practices and philosophies in everything we do, and we'll hear a lot about that with our presenters today. Our goals at the end of this brief Lunch and Learn is that we hope you'll really leave with a better understanding of how unique the relationship is between a tutor and a student, regardless of their age, how academic success volunteers can improve and grow their relationship with students. We're going to hear from the experts who have extensive experience working with students of all ages, and some very practical information on philosophies and strategies that can support your work in the classroom when you're on campus with your students. So our two speakers today are Maybelle Caro from 10,000 Degrees. She's a staff member and she will introduce herself further in just one moment. And Jake Pollock, who is from Bay Area Community Resources. He will introduce himself as well in better detail so you can see their perspective and where they're coming from. So I am going to go to the next slide and let Maybelle take over. Welcome, Maybelle.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much. And this is my first Academic Success Luncheon, so I'm so happy to be here and be a part of this space today. So thank you all for having me here today. So I'm here to talk about what the relationship between tutors and students look like, just from my own experience formally at UC Santa Cruz. But first, I'll introduce myself. If I haven't met you before, my name is Maybelle Caro. I'm a senior fellow here at 10,000 Degrees, supporting Utah Jazz scholarship recipients who are based in Utah and are going to the 6 major Utah schools that Utah Jazz supports. So I work closely not just with Utah Jazz students, but also I'm a part of the 4-year success team here at 10,000 Degrees, where we work together to hopefully support diverse student populations as best as we can and just ensure that they are graduating college feeling supported through equitable means. But prior to my work at 10,000 Degrees, I somewhat recently graduated from UC Santa Cruz back in June 2022 with a Bachelor of Arts in Literature with honors. And in college, I was really involved in different extracurricular activities that included student media, writing, and leadership. But I think my experiences that impacted me the most during my collegiate career was my peer education background. So my first job on campus was being a writing tutor for 2 years at our tutoring center at UC Santa Cruz called Learning Support Services, otherwise known as LSS. And I worked with college students of all writing levels to help them develop their writing abilities for their essays, written projects, even job applications or appeal letters. And some students would even come to me excuse me, for their lab reports. And even though I wasn't necessarily a STEM or science major, it just came to show how the different types of support students needed, no matter what they were studying or no matter what their level of expertise or experience was. And after serving as a writing tutor for about 2 years, I had the chance to mentor tutors during my last year of college at LSS. And I oversaw a small group of new and returning tutors at LSS to just provide them guidance and supervision on how to strengthen their peer tutoring abilities, organization, and communication skills. And the tutors that I oversaw didn't just specialize in writing, but they also were studying STEM fields, computer science, and many more. And um, I hope that through this presentation, we can see that no matter what topic or type of content you're working with your student on, that these skills can be transferable and hopefully be able to support all ages. Next slide, please. And going deeper into what our goals are for today and what the intention of this presentation, I wanted to just briefly cover some of the topics of conversation we'll be going over today. And firstly, that includes the power dynamics in tutoring and just simply deconstructing tutoring relationships and how that contrasts with the normal academia norms that we have seen in our lives and the academia norms and relationships that we continue to see in education. Secondly, I also want to cover quickly structure and consistency, why it's important in our tutoring sessions, and what that means when it comes to building good rapport with our students. And building on top of that, lastly, I want to be able to briefly cover communication empathy, because I think with communication, we're able to not only build good rapport with our students, but get to know our students better, get to know their needs better. And with empathy, providing a safe space for students to come to us, to come to tutors, to address their needs properly. And lastly, of course, I want to be able to provide some space for any questions you all have and just close out this presentation properly before moving on to our next speaker. So firstly, let's jump into power dynamics and tutoring and just deconstructing this relationship. So before briefly jumping into the tutoring aspect of this topic, I wanted to briefly touch upon and reflect on some of the traditional dynamics we see in our learning spaces, and that includes the teacher to student or professor to student relationship that we've probably seen in our lifetimes. And I think in reflecting on these relationships, we often see that these relationships have a hierarchy type of characteristic to them. And this hierarchy can often make it difficult for students to feel like they have someone that is in their corner that can support them. And I think reflecting not only just in my college experience, but just in my experience in school, sometimes students feel, myself included, felt intimidated or nervous to reach out for help. And I think what's so interesting about the tutor to student relationship is that it makes an effort to break this hierarchy type relationship by offering a third party that will allow them to space to more candidly address a student's concerns. And when we work with students one-on-one, we have the opportunity to create strong relationships with them and make it easier to identify their individual needs and their goals. But now the question is, how can we create and foster these relationships properly while still maintaining appropriate boundaries? Because now that we're considering tutoring as a third party form of support, how exactly can we still maintain a good relationship with our students, but still maintaining a relationship that is built on guidance and professionalism? Because I think the reason why that the hierarchy like relationships continue in academia and in education overall is because it's easy to maintain what these boundaries look like. In tutoring, it can become more ambiguous, especially from my experience working with college students when I'm only a year or two older than them or sometimes younger than them. And it can be a bit tricky to navigate what that professionalism can look like. But when it comes to teacher to student or professor to student relationships, that line is more clear. And that's most likely why it's a system that has been reinforced over time because of that clarity. In connection to considering what those power dynamics look like, I think that it's really important to focus on communication and empathy, and just considering why that's important and how that can help contribute to reinforcing power dynamics. And I apologize, I think this slide was out of order, but don't worry, everything is all connected in some way, shape, or form. So communication empathy, how we communicate with our students is essential for the growth and learning development of our students. This can also help, as we spoke about earlier, this can also help tutors strengthen their abilities to address students' needs. And so before connecting back into our previous point about those power dynamics, I wanted to touch on what are some effective ways when we're talking about communication that we can execute in our sessions. So one of those first things includes checking in with students at the beginning of a session. I think that how we start off our sessions and that first impression, no matter how many times you've met with that student, can strongly contribute to how well the session goes or how much improvement we see with the student over time. And that can even just start off with simple questions like, how are you doing today? How are you feeling about this week, about your classes, about your coursework? And if you're checking in with the student again more than once, checking in with them like, how was that last assignment? How did that last assignment go when we last met? What grade did you get on it, if you don't mind me asking? And I think checking in with students at the beginning of their sessions can help build good rapport, but also just let them know that I am genuinely concerned or curious about how you're doing, and I want to be able to start the session to communicate that emotion. Secondly, not only is it important, I think, from my experience, asking or checking in with students generally on how they're doing, but I think establishing what a student's goals or needs look like at the beginning of a session can help you or a tutor or an educator just find direction in the session. I think when we have goals and when we can see a student's needs clearly, we're able to identify what exactly may be most productive to work on in the session, and how, and if a student, for example, is not able to fully or clearly express their needs, maybe that's an area that you can work on with the student to help build that relationship, and to more clearly over time see what those goals are, if they're changing or if they're evolving. And I think not only is it important to practice this effective communication from the beginning, I think from my experience mentoring tutors, I would always encourage them to ask their students follow-up questions even during the session. And I think as tutors, sometimes we feel this weight that we have to know everything and that we have to be experts. But I definitely encourage my tutors to ask students questions if the tutor themselves are not clear about something. I think it shows that you can be vulnerable with your student, and therefore your student can be vulnerable with you back. And similarly, just following up, asking the student, does this strategy feel like it's working for you or for your learning style? Are there other learning strategies that you'd like me to kind of bring up or experiment with next time that we can work on together? I think that allows for flexibility, and it allows the student to realize or just know that you genuinely are working with them and that you care to accommodate them in the session. So I think overall, how does communication tie in with empathy exactly? And I think just from my experience in college, working with students, what I realized is that communication, it's a cornerstone of everything that we do, even outside of the world of education. It's how we build good relationships with our friends and our family and our coworkers and so forth. And if we're able to practice that with our students, we're also able to get to know them and therefore build that empathy. And I think when students are just even sitting with you in that tutoring room in the first place, they're showing that they are vulnerable, and that sometimes they may be hesitant to reach out for that help to begin with. So I think it's always important to acknowledge, even if it's nonverbal, even if it's just in your own head, acknowledging that a student is being vulnerable by just asking for help. And some students are not always able or comfortable to do that. So I think it's um, always crucial to have that as a priority. But also sometimes when ending a session, I always like to tell a student, thank you for reaching out to me today. I really appreciate your time. And, I look forward to meeting with you again soon, hopefully. And now in connecting communication empathy with structure and consistency, and in a moment, we'll go into why it's important. So when we think about structure and consistency, I think it's a bit harder, sometimes more challenging to implement than communication, because sometimes there is a sort of strategy that can go into this aspect of tutoring. And there sometimes, depending on the student and the needs of the student that you're working with, this can be a trickier aspect to tackle, because we want to make sure that not only are we effectively communicating with our student, but we want to make sure that we are creating a structure that allows for proper time management and professionalism, so that we can execute our own goals as tutors properly. So when structuring a session, when as a former mentor of tutors, I would often encourage my tutors to create a agenda that's flexible enough to accommodate for natural conversations and questions as students and questions your student might have. Because I think in the long run, when we create an agenda that's too tight, it can be difficult to stick to that sometimes, because sessions sometimes change in the middle. Session agendas change right in the middle of a session, and as tutors, we have to kind of think of on our feet and think about what do we do now if we had something else planned beforehand. So I think considering a flexible agenda allows for not only natural conversation, but for unpredictability. And it allows tutors to optimize every minute that they have in a session without feeling restrictive on their own end, and for the student as well. So for this particular slide, I've set up a example structure here that we'll briefly go into. I like to think about it as like the 5-finger structure, because you can count on your fingers, and hopefully it's easy to remember. And I think that these steps as well are interchangeable, and allow for a tutor to incorporate their own tutoring style in this type of structure. So firstly, I encourage tutors to start off with, again, as we checked in before, checking with the student. How is the student feeling? What would they like to accomplish today? And overall, that first step is setting our foundation for the rest of the session. Secondly, depending on the type of content that we're moving forward with, and the age range in which our student is in, we can think about the warm-up problem or activity as a way to kind of break the ice a little bit and provide students an exercise or a time to um, participate in an exercise that will allow the tutor to get to know where they're at in their day, and where they are at in the content of a particular assignment. Lastly, or not lastly, but thirdly, helping students with an assignment would be the third step into focusing on what your agenda is going to look like. I'd like to think of the third step as kind of the meat of your tutoring session, and where most of your time will most likely be devoted to, depending on the assignment and any questions that your student has along the way. And for the fourth and fifth steps, I'd like to think of these as probably the most interchangeable steps, because sometimes students like to ask questions at the end. Sometimes tutors find that wrapping up after working on an assignment works better. So again, these steps are interchangeable, but I think 4 and 5 are probably the most interchangeable given how similar they are. So for the fourth step in particular, I always encourage tutors to provide at least those last 10 minutes of their session for any last minute questions that a student has so that there's enough time to tackle them, but there's also enough time to answer them briefly so that you prevent going over time. And lastly, for the fifth step, checking out and just um, hopefully providing some sort of summary if time allots for that, to just reflect on the session with the student, think about what your goals are for next time, and just again checking out with the student how they're feeling at the end, and if there's anything that you as a tutor could do differently for the future. So that's what we are looking at for structure. But when we are intertwining structure and consistency, I think what allows for consistency to be maintained is, again, just overall just sticking to a flexible agenda that is easy to remember or follow for each session. This hopefully will make it easier for tutors to time check and just have a useful tool that you can utilize by memory, and therefore helping the student know what to expect and know how the flow is for each session too, especially if they're working with you on a regular basis. Sometimes it helps to figure out this structure and consistency early on so that the student knows how you navigate through your sessions, and they can also hold themselves accountable in the long run. So overall, our main takeaways from today's presentation is, one, being mindful of how the tutor-student relationship is and how it is a relationship that is much more usually attentive and individualized in comparison to the teacher-student or professor-student relationship that we are all used to. And I think the beauty in tutoring is that we are able to incorporate more of this personal aspect to it because we tend to most likely work with students more one-on-one. Group tutoring does exist, and I've shadowed sessions that have group tutoring, but we see the tutor-student relationship being more present in one-on-one sessions. But I think even in group tutoring sessions, these same practices can still apply. And secondly, when it comes to communication, it's important to just find the best practices to get to know your students, their needs, how you can support them, and the learning strategies that you can incorporate, so that there is an effective observation of growth, hopefully, in the long run. And lastly, establishing structure and consistency. I encourage tutors to create a loose agenda that works best for your tutoring style, that is easy to remember and can be consistently implemented in your sessions. And hopefully with these three core values, we're able to navigate tutoring sessions more easily. But not only that, just be able to have fun with tutoring. And I like to say that if teachers and professors can add their own style to their learning agendas, why can't tutors, right? So hopefully these values will allow tutors to more effectively navigate their sessions and be able to add their own style and continue to build good rapport.
Maybelle, thank you. You did perfectly for hitting right on time at 12:30. I know we want to have some time for questions, but if it's okay with you, we would like to get ask people to either jot them down, hold them, or put them in the chat. And we'll have Jake present so that in case anything comes together and enables a more rich conversation, we can get to it. Is that okay with you, Maybelle?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so we will.
Thank you.
I'm going to scroll. Thank you so much. And we're going to we can repost this obviously with your contact information also if people have questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Monica to quickly introduce Jake.
Great. Maybelle, thank you so much. I'm really excited to introduce Jake Pollock today. He has generously given us his time. to meet with us and talk about his area of expertise. Jake is with Bay Area Community Resources and has over 10 years experience working with after school and summer programs. And currently he is the BACR after school coordinator at Bahia Vista Elementary. So welcome, Jake. We are so happy to have you. And certainly if there's anything else you'd like to fill in about your bio, please feel free, or you can launch right into your presentation. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Nothing in particular to add. I've worked specifically with low-income English as a second language youth in Marin County for it's been about 12 years now. So I've been coordinating programs that entire time, and that's the majority of my experience. So at BACR, we have some student best practices that I think are very applicable to both the staff that we train and also the volunteers that work with us. And we try to instill these values and norms with our students as well. And this isn't something that I want to spend a whole lot of time on, but I just think it's something that recognizing the needs and strengths of our peers is very important. Mentioning to the students that we want to build healthy relationships, we're guided by a caring heart, really focusing on doing our best every time, regardless of whether or not we're actually successful, makes a big difference in building a growth mindset with our students, which is something that's so crucial to getting them to adapt a learner's mentality and learn to love learning, which is really going to serve them best long term. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, we want to shift our students' mindset. There we go. We want to shift our students' mindset from learning a specific thing to loving learning. If they love to learn, then they will be excited about tutoring sessions, and they will be excited about spending more time with you, their tutors or volunteers, and it can absolutely change their outlook on the time they spend in school if we can get them excited about learning new things and gaining skills and becoming and getting that self-efficacy. Is it possible to pull up the YouTube video?
Boy, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure the link is linking. May I?
I can pull it up on my screen and share it if you like.
That would be great, Jake. I'm so sorry. I don't think I realized it was embedded.
No worries.
Do you have screen sharing capability?
Give me just 1 second and
Thanks.
I will let you know.
Okay, thanks. I need to stop share then, maybe, correct?
Go. Pulling up.
Select these levels
All right.
of.
There we go. Let me share my screen. There we go. Full screen. And here we go. But before we begin, this video is about student engagement. So the idea being that a student that's actively working on something might not be as engaged as we think, and you'll see in the video as we proceed exactly what that looks like.
Engagement in less than 5 minutes, I promise. If you watch this scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll notice that Even in the midst of a boring lesson, none of the students are actually misbehaving. They're quiet. Nobody's tossing spitballs or playing those paper football games or checking their cell phones because, well, the cell phones back then were the size of a brick. Remember the Zach Morris phone. But most of the students are essentially following the rules. They aren't engaged. But what are they? Well, some seem to be retreating, a few seem to be playing the game of school, but nobody is actually committed to the learning. Well, here's where Schlechty's levels of engagement becomes helpful. It provides a useful framework for thinking about what it means for students to be genuinely engaged in their learning. Schlechty defines it this way. Engagement is active. It requires the students to be attentive as well as in attendance. It requires students to be committed to the task and find some inherent value in what he or she is being asked to do. The engaged student not only does the task assigned, but also does the task with enthusiasm and diligence. In 2002, Philip Schlechty developed a framework for thinking about student engagement based on two core ideas of attention and commitment. At the bottom, you have rebellion, which involves diverted attention and no commitment to the task. This is the student who seems to be acting out and causing disruptions, and as a result, they fail to learn from the task. Next, you have retreatism with no attention and no commitment. Unlike the rebellion, this student in retreat is not actively disrupting the learning, but instead seems to be kind of checked out. This student is often distracted and emotionally withdrawn from the task, and as a result, this student learns little or nothing from the task. At the next level, you have ritual compliance. This involves both low attention and low commitment. Unlike retreatism, a ritually compliant student doesn't completely check out, but instead is doing the bare minimum to avoid confrontation. This student will learn at a low level, and the task will not be retained over time. Next is strategic compliance. Often this looks like engagement because the student might be performing at a high level, but it's not. Here, the student has high attention on the task, but low commitment to what he or she is doing. This is the student who is playing the game of school, focused on things like grades, parental approval, rewards, and class rank. But the learning isn't intrinsically rewarding, and as a result, this student will often learn at a high level, but fails to retain the learning over time or transfer it to a content. And then finally, you have engagement. This requires both high attention and high commitment. There are students completely biased in out of a strong sense of intrinsic motivation, and this includes meaning and choice and challenge. This student will continue focusing even when the task gets more complex and challenging, and often they're going to choose to learn even when it is ungraded. This student will learn at a deep level, and the transfer will continue to new contexts. And this is why it's important that we as teachers focus on how to make the subject intrinsically engaging. And this happens when we tap into student curiosity and creativity and purpose. And when this happens, students are more likely to grow into passionate, lifelong learners.
Yeah, so I really
This
like.
right here is one of my 18 audiobooks that
Sorry.
I own. It made 82 sales.
My apologies. YouTube kept going. I really like that video because it very clearly articulates the different levels of engagement that you can see from students that is so common regardless of if you're a school teacher, if you're in after school, if you're a volunteer during the school day or after school. There are some students that you will encounter where they're actively rebelling against whatever it is for whatever reason that you may see, and it just keeps going until you finally have the fully engaged student who is asking for more material to learn at the end. And how we get there is there's no one single way. Every single person is different. And so I think it really helps to think about mentors and people in our lives who were very important in our own personal growth. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I, in my presentations, typically don't like to talk the whole time. I like to get feedback from everybody else who is participating, and I would love to hear from you guys about what is your mindset towards engagement and working with the youth, and how you might get deeper engagement from them. So I will, feel free to type it in the chat, feel free to use the reaction if you'd like to talk or to just start talking. I'm happy to share myself as well, but I want to give everybody a chance first. I will say that there is no one right answer. If anybody has any experience working with a student that they would like to share.
Jake, we have a couple comments that have come through on the chat. One comment is avoidance if they struggle with the subject. Another one is asking students what they want to do, accomplish, etc., what their goals are. And then we have another person today that's asking, do you have any suggestions for starting engagement?
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely.
you can answer that. Yeah, thank you.
I have, well, first I'd like to say I've absolutely seen so many students that avoid working on subjects that they're uncomfortable with, or that they might have a preconception that they're not good at. And my best strategy to get students to engage more with something that they're uncomfortable with is all based around building rapport with them. And it actually has nothing to do with the content that they're learning whatsoever. Students, yeah, thank you, Sally. Yeah, absolutely. It's, if a student trusts you, they're much more likely to go out on a limb and try something that they think is difficult or challenging. And building that trust is the key to sort of getting all the other aspects out of the time that you spend together. In order to maximize them, you have to build that foundation first. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we'll be sort of diving into more examples of that later in the in this presentation. But it's all revolves around building a strong relationship, and letting the students know that you care about them, and that it isn't about math or reading or writing. It's about helping them and being there to support them, and letting them know that that's really your real purpose there. Next slide, please. Would anyone like to share who was someone that really inspired them to learn, and why they were so inspirational?
I actually have one. I was thinking about my fourth grade teacher was very inspiring. And I can't tell you why, other than it was a man. And, you know, all of my other teachers had always been women up until that point. And so having a man in the classroom who really engaged the students and sort of did experiments, you know, wasn't just talking at the blackboard, if you will, at that time. But he's a teacher that I still fondly remember. And I remember he actually showed up at my high school graduation, which was super sweet. But just the fact that he was a different type of person, you know, he was a man. I had all female teachers before that. So.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Judy and Jillian. If you don't mind, I'm just going to share what's in the chat. Judy, I see you wrote about your dad, how he was a professor and was passionate about his research and his students. And in my experience, being passionate about something just sort of that enthusiasm spills over, and the youth that you end up working with, they feel that and they receive it in such a way that it gets them excited as well, because they can feel your enthusiasm and your excitement. And thank you, Jillian, for sharing as well. Yeah, you talked about your fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Stopp, and how she took the time to speak with you one-on-one. Personally, for me, I had a math teacher in sixth grade who was able to have some lessons about social studies, even though it was a math class. And I'm pretty sure it was an advanced math class. But he talked to us about Lewis and Clark and was able to weave in other aspects of learning into the class. And it was so interesting to just spend time with him. And I will never forget him because of that. And it wasn't the math that I remembered. It was just, I remembered being in his class didn't feel like sort of being taught at. It was more, it was much more inclusive. Everybody was sort of involved in our learning. Yeah, and teachers who use humor, like being your genuine self makes a huge difference. Trying to be what we think our students might need is not a good strategy to, young people can tell when adults are not being genuine, and being your genuine self is always the best strategy. They will appreciate you for who you are, regardless of who that is. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask this question. Oh, all right. You know what? Actually, let's just go next slide. We're gonna keep moving along. So in the after school and summer school programs that I run, our learning, we can skip this slide. It's all good. That one's not, I don't think that's going to be super relevant. I feel like this is an old version. If you don't mind, I will share my screen with a more updated slides. Thank you.
No problem. I know the time goes very quickly, so do whatever works for you, Jake, of course.
Yeah, I want to hit the most important slides for all our wonderful volunteers. Let's get, there we go. So this, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it has been very useful for me in my time in youth development and education. And it's so important to think about when you're first meeting with students. You know, checking in with them can go beyond, especially when you're working with the youth that are, maybe they're in kindergarten, maybe first grade, maybe second grade. Asking how are you might not get you the answer, might not get you a complete answer, I guess is the best way to put it. But asking questions like, are you hungry? Have you eaten enough? Are you thirsty? How did you sleep last night? those kinds of questions will get you answers about their physiological needs, where if you don't know that before you start your tutoring session, a student who's hungry is not going to learn very well. And if you don't know that before you start and they're hungry, then you're going to get very low levels of engagement. And just having that one question at the beginning makes a huge difference. And then as you move up, you have like safety needs. So asking them about their family, perhaps, like you can, I think general broad questions tend to be the best because you're not probing too deeply before you've developed that rapport with them, where you ask something like, how are things at home? How are you sleeping? Other things like that. Oftentimes, especially with students, my experience is in elementary and middle school age students. So anywhere from 3 years old to like 14 years old are the age groups that I've worked with. And when you're talking about 10 years old and younger, you really need to be mindful that they might not have the language to articulate exactly what they're experiencing. And so you might have to go a little deeper with your questioning about if it seems like they're sleepy, like, oh, okay, do you have any brothers and sisters? Maybe there's a baby at home that's crying all night. Maybe there's something else that's going on that might take them a little longer to share with you, but you can sort of get that feel for it as you're checking in with them at the beginning of your sessions. And then just reiterating to the students your morals and your beliefs and things like that about love and belonging and friendship and family and sense of connection can make a huge difference in them sort of understanding more about you. Even if they're really young, they can still conceptualize some of these concepts, even though it seems a little too more advanced than what we would think. The youth are very, very capable. And eventually, long term, our goal is for them to have the enough self-actualization to be able to articulate to us, I need more support in this area. But when you're working with a 7-year-old, they often won't be able to tell you that. And you'll have to sort of do a little bit of investigating yourself while you're working with them on whatever subject they may need support in.
Jake, do you have a tip about how you could ask that question as a tutor without crossing the tutor-student boundary too far? Do you have a quick tip on that at all, or?
More specific, which
You had a question in the chat. Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll explain. So I totally appreciate the care and concern. And maybe we're in a slightly different role as volunteers than you are, but we also want to be careful that we don't, especially with the younger ones, get into areas that are confidential, too personal. And especially as a volunteer where you can't really go to their home and quiet the sleeping baby. So just how do you handle that in particular when especially a younger student reveals something like that that's really quite personal?
In my experience,
Hello.
when you get in, sorry, go ahead.
I'm fine, and you?
Oh, I'll mute him.
Hi.
Thanks. In my experience, if you get information like that, it's not necessarily for you to do something with. It's more for you to know, oh, this student is arriving very sleepy, so it may be beneficial to take them outside and get some fresh air so that they are a little more alert and awake and less sleepy rather than in a classroom, perhaps. I'm in a classroom with 6 to 8-year-olds. Example of a question to ask. Just, have you eaten? Do you need anything? Do you need anything to eat? How did you sleep last night? Are you thirsty? questions like that that get a little deeper than just how are you are my recommendation. And then sharing, oh, I forgot to mention this, sharing about yourself. If you are thirsty or anything like that, letting them know after you ask can also help build that relationship, because you're just being open and honest about, you know, I didn't bring my water today, but I am a little thirsty. It's not a big thing, but it does make a difference.
Monica, how are we doing on time? Just want to check in because I know some people have to jump off at 1. And if we have questions for Maybelle and Jake, I want to make sure we don't leave people hanging.
Yes, so I've got 12:56. I know that some people do have a hard stop. What I might suggest, Jake, your presentation is so meaty and I hate to speed you through it. If we do have people that need to hop off, please feel free to do that. We will obviously follow up with Jake's information and Maybelle's information in case you'd like to message them directly. For those of you that would like to stay on, Deb, would you suggest that we go ahead and keep going? And if you need to hop off, feel free.
Maybe we can add 5 minutes that people can either put questions that they didn't get to ask Maybelle on her portion of the presentation in the chat. But again, as we said, if you need to hop off, please hop off, and we can provide follow-up contact information for anyone who might not have gotten the chance to ask questions. There's so much good information here, and maybe minds are spinning.
So why don't you go ahead, Jake? Looks like a couple people are hopping off.
Sure.
But go ahead and keep going.
All righty. I will pull back up the presentation. So that was the summary of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's just something that's really good to keep in mind, particularly if a child has physiological or safety needs. That's not the physiological needs, sometimes we can address, and safety needs often not, but it's good to keep in mind because we know that they're going to have a harder time learning. So the expectation should be set for it's going to take a little longer. So knowing that in advance can help you sort of be patient and let them know, like, hey, it's, you know, don't worry about getting it right the first time. We are going to continue to work at this together as a team, and I'm going to support you until we get it right. And just continuing to reiterate that that is what you're there for. There we go. So that being said, oftentimes students, especially young students, I see this so often with my kindergartners and first graders, they want to give me really big bear hugs, and I love it, but it's not really appropriate for me to be getting hugs from students like that. And so my best suggestion for physical contact with students is, if they really seem like they need a hug, to do the side hug. And outside of that, high fives or fist bumps or elbow bumps, if you're less comfortable with that type of physical contact, can be useful in just letting them know that, like, you're excited to see them and you want to, you can even come up with a little high five routine with them, which could be something, a fun warm-up game that you could do as to build rapport. And then lastly, there we go. My computer's a little slow. Just sort of reiterating what Maybelle was saying. If you, before your session, already know what materials and supplies you're going to need, you already have your sort of rough outline of how the time is spent is going to go together. You know what space you're going to be utilizing. That all will enhance your time together with the student, and can make a difference in having a more productive, positive time together. So
Wow. Fabulous. Everyone's asking for access to the slides, and people are, a couple of our volunteers had to hop off and actually go to work. So hopefully they'll put some of the recommendations into play right away. Can we see if some of our remaining volunteers online, like Jamie or anyone else, has questions for Maybell or Jake before we let them go back to their work?
Actually, oh, go ahead. We've got one quick question that came through on the chat. Maybell or Jake, do either of you have special tips for developing a relationship when you look more like the teacher than the student?
Yeah, Maybell, we didn't all graduate in 2022 like you and have the luxury of the amazing peer-to-peer mentoring relationship. Do you want to address that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Kim means this in a literal sense, like if you literally look more like the teacher than the student, or if it's more metaphorical. I think either way, it's really important to clarify, what other outside support a student is getting if they are attending school at the moment, what that relationship looks like with the educator that they are currently working with. And I think for me personally, that makes it easier to identify what your role is going to be in their educational journey. Because I think whether you're peer tutor or peer educator, I think if you know that your student is already, working with a teacher, working with other outside support, it can help you further identify, okay, maybe my role is to provide other supplementary support that maybe does not exist for the student, while still maintaining that boundary and just understanding that the student is being taught by someone else or is being delegated course load or coursework by another individual.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense, because a lot of our students do have scaffolding outside of what we do as well.
And I imagine that if you're volunteering with a student, you were referred at some point. And so there's some sort of background that exists for why that student was referred for extra specialized tutoring. And with that in mind, if you have a younger student that's not going to be able to articulate to you like things about their course load and things like that, 6-year-olds really have no idea. You're really just there to let them know that, you meet them, you're excited, you show that enthusiasm, and you show genuine interest in who they are and what they're excited about. And you let them know generally, like, this is how the time is going to go together, because knowing that in advance, especially for students that come from any sort of background, if they may have had trauma in their lives, if they know what's going to happen, it makes it a lot less stressful for them, and it allows them to relax in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So having that consistency of, I show up at this time, I'm very excited to see you. We're going to do this today. Why don't you tell me about how your day has been going? If you're hungry or thirsty, and having that sort of integrated into part of your routine will really help build that rapport and that relationship. And it's sort of, regardless of what your aesthetic is, it's much more about what you are giving off and how you're interacting with them.
So I have a question for both of you, maybe, and this may apply a little more to younger students. I was one of the ones that put avoidance in we're working with the student because they're struggling in the subject, and when it's hard, I think it's just human nature to try and postpone. So any additional, I guess my question is twofold. One, any additional comments and tips you would have on, I love your slide about engaging if they're trying to avoid. Another thing that I notice and we hear about is they'll try to speed through. Just, I want to get it done. And let's get the pain out of the way, which obviously is not engaging. So any tips around that as well from either or both of you?
I would say if you're checking in with them in the middle, sort of as Maybell mentioned before, and you notice that they're speeding through, if you ask them to try to, could you explain that to me? Could you tell me how you got that? And have them try and break it down for you and have those steps where if they truly lack clarity in something, they won't be able to. And then that allows you to sort of circle back and be like, okay, let's spend a little more time on that so that we can make sure we really understand it thoroughly. And just explaining to them, like, I know it's really difficult. I'm like very proud of you for working so hard on this, and praising their efforts, regardless of how the outcome is as they're working on it. And if you're noticing like, I think they just sort of skipped right through that question, just gentle questions about like, how did you get that answer? And like, let's look at that again and try and look at it in a little more detail, is often very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. I think those are some really great points. And I think just to add on to that, I think not only just further clarifying how the student got this outcome on a piece of writing or on whatever assignment that they're working on, but also for you as a tutor, knowing when to let go. I think that was something that I struggled with a bit early on when I started tutoring, was knowing, where that threshold was when students really just wanted to push through an assignment, really wanted to get an assignment over with. It's okay to see a situation and see like, okay, maybe we're not going to make as much progress as I would like with the student, but at least like what you were saying, Jake, just making that effort to further clarify how a student got there will that allow them hopefully to see what they need to improve on. But definitely, don't be too hard on yourself if you can't help them get to where you want them to go, because I think ultimately it's on the student to continue to ask for help and hopefully make those improvements.
Thank you so much, Jake and Maybell. I learned so much.